True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who maybe have never been on this channel before, this is a channel with little drama and lots of facts. Everything is from the eyes, the lens of somebody who's been in federal law enforcement for 28 years. So that's where we're coming from. We'd like to bring on a lot of guests that have very unique and distinguished experience in different areas, just to provide that education and information to you all. Love the takes that you all have. Listen, there's no chance that an FBI agent, an attorney, a judge, any former law enforcement really is ever going to be on a jury. The people who are on juries are people just like you, unless we have those people in our audience today. So I really want to just thank you for being here and tell you how much I appreciate your feedback. I read every comment. I'm a little bit behind on a couple of them. We had thousands of comments, so I'm a little bit behind there. I try to do, 10 or 20 a night. It's good to be an insomniac sometimes. So in any event, thank you for being here. I want to set up the case for those of you who might not be familiar with Brian Thompson. Brian Thompson was the CEO of United Healthcare, the largest healthcare conglomerate really in the United States. Recall his company, United Healthcare, was under a lot of scrutiny from the Department of Justice since 2023 concerning whether they were a monopoly and also whether insider trading was going on. So seen as kind of a company under a lot of scrutiny. And that has come in, of course, with a lot of conspiracy theorists. But essentially, after about a 6-day manhunt after the crime was committed, a man named Luigi Mangione, 26-year-old male, Ivy Leaguer, grew up in a very prestigious background, went to a $40,000 a year school, all boys school in Maryland. Again, went to UPenn, received 2 diplomas from there, scientific, AI, computer. This guy was really, by all accounts, brilliant. I've posted his speech. He was the graduated valedictorian in high school. Of note is the fact that after he got a job with Car Tech as liaison consultant, basically think tank guy in that corporation. He was in Hawaii and working, and everything seemed to be going well. He did suffer a surfing accident, which resulted apparently in a back injury. Posted a lot about that and just a lot about him. What is interesting is he left a trail of evidence from this crime that is honestly a dream for any investigator. He left a bottle that he had touching to his mouth and left fingerprints on. He left a wrapper from something he ate. He left cartridges, meaning a bullet plus a casing. That's called a cartridge. He left 3 full cartridges at the scene when seemingly his gun jammed and he ejected those full cartridges. He left 3 casings because he took 3 shots. He hit Mr. Thompson once in the calf. That was his first shot, where he dipped his muzzle, I believe, and that's why he missed. The second shot was the kill shot to his back. And then a third shot which is missed, which told me from the very beginning, while he was somebody very skilled in terms of understanding his firearm, he knew how it would function. He knew he would need to manually clear. He was not a marksman by any stretch of the imagination. He also took a Greyhound bus from Atlanta to New York. He took a Greyhound bus out of New York. It is believed, we know he ended up in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where he was arrested after an astute customer at McDonald's pointed him out, talked to a McDonald's employee. They called it in, and an arrest was made. Found on him was a firearm, a silencer, 4 false IDs, including the ID that was used when the murder suspect got into the hostel, they had to present identification, and they presented the identification that was on Mr. Mangione. And so this was very strong evidence. He also had a manifesto. We'll get into that on another section, but without further ado, I really want to bring in my guest. Stephanie is amazing. She has a background as a tool mark expert. This is a very specialized expertise. It goes beyond being a firearms instructor, a marksman, even a gunsmith. This goes far beyond that. And I can't wait to bring her up on stage and have her really talk about her background, her education, and then she's going to educate us on what was done with Mangione's gun, how that was compared to the cartridges and casings found at the scene. All right, without further ado, here we go. Stephanie, there you are. Miss Walker, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for joining us, Stephanie.
Sure. Anytime.
So please, if you could, start with your background. Tell us everything that you've studied and how you got to the expertise you have to share with us today.
Sure. Well, I guess my forensic journey started, I have a master's degree in forensic science from VCU, where I currently teach. So that was back in 2002. So during my graduate career is when I first got introduced to firearms, just through a class that I took, and I did some research in it. And then ultimately that led me to pursue a career in firearm and tool mark identification or examination. So after I graduated, I got my first full-time job in a crime lab in North Carolina, in their state crime lab system in Raleigh. And so I spent almost 7 years there. I completed my 2-year training program there. And then I worked cases. I also did some trajectory analysis on some crime scenes while I worked there. Ultimately, in 2009, I came back to Virginia. Just to be closer to family, because I grew up here and my family's here. But I worked in the crime lab in Richmond in the Virginia State Crime Lab System, the Department of Forensic Science, for 10 years. So from 2009 to 2019, I was a fireman tool mark examiner within the Virginia State Crime Lab System. In 2019, I decided to pursue teaching. I had started teaching kind of on a part-time basis while working at the crime lab, fell in love with it. And so I've been here at VCU teaching again for the same program I graduated from 20 years ago, for the undergraduate and graduate master's program here in forensic science. So that's kind of the ballpark summary of my career. But I've been most of my time was spent in the crime lab as a fireman tool mark examiner.
It's amazing. And I know in that time frame, case by case, you learn so much. How many cases would you just ballpark estimate?
I mean, thousands. Honestly, I don't even know if I could put a number on it. Because there's, big cases, small cases, and they definitely add up. I've seen a lot of interesting types of cases. The one thing I loved about firearms examination especially is that every case is different. So you just never know, and all the new ammunition that comes out, new firearms. So it's been thousands of cases, though.
Well, I appreciate you coming here. And, this isn't our first conversation. I contacted you during the Delphi trial because I had a lot of questions, a lot of concern about that particular unspent cartridge, that was ejected. But I'm going to keep focused over here on this, since that case, of course, was adjudicated shortly after we had our discussions. But on this case, and I should have said they examined the cartridge or the casings, because they didn't examine, as far as I've read, anything to do with the cartridges. And you wouldn't really need to, would you? Explain to us exactly the process that would have happened.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's been a lot of talk about what kind of gun it was, and there's 3D printing and all this kind of interesting things about what kind of gun it was. But on a forensic level, it would have been treated just like any other firearms analysis case, no matter where the gun came from or how it was put together, it's still going to work the same way as every other gun. You're still going to have the same types of tool marks from the firing process. And so what would happen is they would test fire the suspect weapon and just simply do a direct comparison on a microscope to any of the evidence recovered at the scene. And that does include potentially any unfired rounds that were potentially cycled through the gun and ejected. But the way that process works is really, again, it's simply a microscopic comparison of the tool marks that we know are associated with the firing process and determining if they are similar enough to the test fires to say that they were fired from that particular gun.
So I'm going to break it down to the different marks that she's talking about, just for our audience. There's going to be extractor, there's going to be ejector, and then there's going to be the actual firing pin hit. Tell us a little bit about comparing each of those and how some marks are more distinctive than others, and how that really can lead you to say definitively or near definitively that a that a bullet was fired from a particular gun.
Yeah, so obviously with the firing process, there's a lot of high pressure and energy going into that process, right? So, the first thing that contacts the ammunition is the firing pin, right? So the firing pin is going to strike a somewhat softer metal surface on the cartridge called a primer, right? That primer material is designed to be softer than the surrounding metal. So that the firing pin can hit it with enough force to cause a spark. It has a very shock sensitive compound inside of it that when it's struck a sharp blow, it creates a tiny little explosion and a spark. That spark is what ignites the gunpowder inside the cartridge case, right? And it's the burning gunpowder that pushes the bullet down the barrel, but it also pushes the cartridge case back against the gun. So there's a surface that the cartridge case rests against that the firing pin passes through, and that's called the breech face. And so under that high pressure, the same pressure that's pushing the bullet down the barrel at a high velocity is also pushing the cartridge case into that breech face. So the firing pin impression and the breech face impression are the two main tool marks that we rely on for determining if a cartridge case was fired in a particular firearm.
Stephanie, I'm so glad you said that. And I'm going to stop you for one moment, because
Sure.
I do want to make a quick distinction that was one of what I saw as sort of a main issue in the Delphi case. Mm-hmm. Because in that case, there was only one cartridge. Right. And so it wasn't fired. There were no breech face markings. There's no firing pin markings. And so now you're just limited to the ejector and extractor markings, which make an identification, I'll call it less distinctive. I won't say less reliable, but I'm going to say less distinctive. But
it's harder, right? Yeah, because the only other two tool marks that we use, generally speaking, are the extractor and the ejector, right? So the extractor is the little hook, right? Little hook that sits right underneath the rim of the cartridge case. It's what holds the cartridge case against that breech face and moves it in and out of the gun, right? So it's meant to pull the cartridge case out of the gun after it's fired or unfired, right? Fired or unfired, it doesn't matter. The extractor does the exact same job every time. It holds the cartridge case in that position until it contacts the ejector and is removed from the gun. And the ejector is a little fixed post, right? That as the cartridge case comes back, it contacts that post at a certain point, and that pushes the cartridge or cartridge case out of the opening in the gun. Now, obviously, during the firing process, those sources of contact are under higher pressure, right? So usually what we see in practical casework is that those tool marks are usually much more detailed, right? There's a lot more of those tool marks present to be able to identify or potentially compare during the firing process. When it's not fired, right, it's just under usually the control of someone manually pulling a slide back It's not nearly as much pressure as the firing process, but those same tool marks can be left by the extractor and the ejector, even in a manual operation where you're ejecting it. Not usually as good, don't have as much of a mark to look at. So sometimes they mark well and sometimes they don't. And it can change from cartridge to cartridge. So I could rack the slide 6 times and I might get 3 of them that have good marks and I might get 3 of them that don't. So it's a lot more variable when there's not a firing process.
So let me ask about this. With an ejector and an extractor, tell us about the uniqueness, if you will, of an extractor and an ejector gun to gun, or if it's not that unique.
Actually, it is. So we have found that, again, the uniqueness of any of these tool marks that we're talking about, the uniqueness comes back to the manufacturing process, right? There is an inherent, uncontrollable byproduct of the manufacturing process that causes even manufactured parts made one after another in high capacity still have a unique microscopic surface, right? It's not from the naked eye, they're all going to look the same. But on a microscopic level, they are all different. There have been plenty of studies in our field looking at consecutively manufactured extractors, consecutively manufactured ejectors. So they are just as unique as any other gun part, breech face, firing pin, or anything. What changes is the quality of the tool marks, right? And one of the things that affects the quality of the tool mark or the completeness of a tool mark is pressure, right? So that's usually the variation that we see from fired versus unfired, is that it's a lower pressure. And so we might not always get the highest quality marks, but uniqueness wise, it's the same as every other tool mark that we look at.
Now, talk about this, because I saw the fact that this is what they everybody in the media, right? They love to throw out ghost gun.
Yeah. Yes.
In fact, somebody was interviewing me. I think it might have been Inside Edition or one of those. Anyway, they said, "Tell us about how explosive a ghost gun is." And I think it was very disappointing because they said it just doesn't have a serial number.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's not any sexier than that, but everybody's loving to throw this ghost gun,
Yeah.
out there. We know that he constructed this gun. At least that's what we've been told, right? He
Right.
took different pieces and parts and put it together and made a gun. In my view, but I want to hear it from an expert that handles these tool marks, that's going to make it even worse for him, because now you have very distinctive extractor, ejector, breech face, firing pin that might be different than the ones that are run out of a assembly line. Talk to us about.
You are exactly right. So, I mean, and you know as well as I do that is such a broad term. It can mean a lot of things. It could mean that he had a normal, barrel and slide to a pistol and then just ordered or created his own frame. Like, ghost gun is a very broad term, so it really depends on a lot of things. But yeah, when it comes to what we call Frankenstein guns, right? We like to call them Franken guns, where they're mixing and matching parts from different manufacturers and stuff. Once you start combining parts that are going to leave tool marks from different manufacturers, now you've made that gun even more unique. Because instead of having all Glock parts or all Smith & Wesson parts, you have this part from this manufacturer and this part from this manufacturer. And so once you combine all of those and you look at the likelihood that somebody else made the exact same gun, now the likelihood that this gun looks like another gun is even lower. So yeah, I agree that in certain circumstances, it makes it even easier to identify that particular gun.
I had a case once where a guy had tried to basically adulterate his fingerprint. Right? So he's like, okay, this is going to be perfect. I'll just make sure I don't have any fingerprints. Well, guess what? Worst thing you can do, because
right
now you're the only guy running around with no fingerprints. So
right. And then you've got scarring and all that things to make you even more unique than you were before, right?
Right. So, the first time when I found out that he made his own gun, I'm like, oh, yes. standpoint of understanding that they're either going to easily be able to make an identification or it's going to be more complex.
Right.
As you may know, I think a day later, they had already done, might have been a day and a half or so,
Yeah.
had already done this examination. Tell us about how long an examination like this would take, and would you opt to just do the casings at first just to get that out there to the media and then later go back in and do the cartridges?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if they're working under a time crunch, that's personally what I would do. Cartridge cases are by far most commonly the quickest and easiest to come to a conclusion on. Now, that's obviously not true for every type of gun. So, like, cases, right? It's one extreme or the other. Either it's going to be so easy and so obvious that the marks just line up by themselves when you put them on a microscope, and it's really quick. So, a 3 cartridge case compared to a gun in an easy comparison I mean, it's going to take longer to go through all of the processes of getting the report reviewed and verified and all that than to do the actual comparison itself. They can be really quick. Now, if you've got a different type of gun that maybe does not leave really good marks and it's a little bit more complicated, then you can get into, 2 or 3 days maybe of looking at it. But they can definitely cartridge case, a small case like that would be considered a small case, at least in my mind. That would be quick and easy. The extractor and ejector marks, a little bit different. Again, they might not prioritize looking at those if they have the fired evidence. The only other thing they would have left to look at is the bullets. And bullet comparisons can also be quick and easy, depending on how damaged they are, maybe. But the cartridge cases would be quick.
A little bit about that, because we have one bullet that went into his calf, one bullet that went into his back that was the kill shot, and then one bullet we don't know here in the public. I don't know. I tried to zoom in and get close-ups because we could see on the sidewalk where they marked all their evidence.
Right.
But I was able to really zoom in on one of the cartridges, and I thought, from my view, it was a 9mm. I didn't see that it was a subsonic, but as you know, subsonic really just has to do with the grain
Correct.
of that bullet. Everybody, it's like the ghost gun subsonic. It
Right.
sounds like we're talking about some cool, thing. It's really not that cool.
No.
It only just means that a regular cartridge bullet you use you would want it to have a grain that usually would fire at a supersonic. In other words, you can hear it.
Right.
But he was concerned about sound. We know that because he used a silencer.
Right.
Where this murderer is. And so it's possible it could be. I compared it really closely to a bunch of 9mm subsonic, with lesser grain or higher grain rounds. I couldn't see it. Looked like your normal 9mm round, plus it could be more expensive to do it the other way. But I digress. Tell us about what you're going to compare with the bullets, even though in the media, all we've heard is that the cartridges match.
Yeah. So, I mean, the bullets, it can be a lengthier, more challenging exam, only because bullets tend to hit things and get damaged, right? But ultimately, what you're looking at on the bullet is the marks on the outside of the bullet from it interacting with the rifling in the barrel, right? So most guns, especially handguns, are going to have those spiral grooves cut out of the inside of the barrel, which forces the bullet into a spin. And that just creates stability in flight. But those grooves and the areas between them, those are going to cut into the outside of the bullet and leave almost what looks like little stripes, right? And we call them striated marks or scratch marks. And those are the microscopic marks that we compare to test-fired bullets, again, to see if a bullet was fired from a gun. So the only reason, again, that usually could be more complicated is if the bullet got damaged, if the barrel just didn't have very deep rifling, so it doesn't cut very well. So barrels can sometimes be a little bit more challenging to deal with, and bullets from barrels. But for the most part, they can also be just as quick and easy as the cartridge cases. So it really just depends on what kind of barrel was on this gun and how damaged the bullets were.
And just so everyone in our audience knows, when there's a barrel, what we mean by barrel is the cylindrical apparatus that the bullet goes through and exits. And
Right.
inside there, for those of you who have never shot a gun, if you look down this barrel, there are these spiral type marks inside. They're grooves. And that's what she is talking about, is that bullet enters there at this huge velocity and goes and exit. And in that process, these grooves make this beautiful sort of footprint on the bullet. Explain further if I didn't hit it.
No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's, that's how we describe it in court too, as far as, the bullet has to engage with those spirals in order to get into that tight spin. It's, we describe it as being the equivalent of, a football player, a quarterback throwing a spiral, right? It's just, as soon as you create that spin, it creates this long, stable trajectory where the bullet is going to be more accurate. And travel farther. And so the better that those grooves interact with the bullet, the better that, that spin is gonna be during flight. But again, it's coming out at an extremely high velocity. There's a lot of energy being carried with that bullet. So even at close range, as soon as it contacts something, it's still carrying a lot of energy. And so that's where we see a lot of damage being created by the energy from that bullet.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the film footage that we've all had and all seen in the media on another segment just right after it happened. I quickly kind of ran through that and what I saw. And that was pull the trigger, immediately rack the slide, pull, rack. In other words, he absolutely knew he had practiced with this gun. In fact, now we know he made the gun, and that he knew it was not going to be able to put a bullet back into the chamber after the casing was ejected, because there's no surprise. He's like, bam, boom, bam, boom, bam, boom. But then he struggles and he's like down there, I think, trying to clear it. The ejection of 3 cartridges occur. Some people have said, no, he knew he was only going to shoot 3 because he needed the words deny, defend, depose on the 3. I'm not really buying that. We're going to see. All we know is it was on casings, but this guy wasn't the type of marksman that would know, guess what? Point of aim, point of impact. I really need 1 bullet. He didn't. I don't think that that's what we had here. What did you see on
that? I tend to agree with your observations. I saw somebody that expected there not to be an automatic extraction and ejection, but especially after that first shot and then reload, after the next shot, there was a lot of struggling with the gun. And I mean, I guess that kind of supports the fact that he probably built it himself. Maybe he didn't use all the right parts. And so something obviously with how that gun is constructed was preventing it from operating how a standard semi-automatic, would operate. So that tells me that he's not really the gun expert that maybe people want to believe that he is. He knew enough to build his own gun. But again, anybody can look up instructions on how to do that on the web. But obviously something went wrong with that gun. And to miss at that short of range or kind of not have control, I agree with your assessment there.
And I also wondered, now that we know he built his own gun, how in marksmanship, I mean, we talk about stance, we talk about proper sight alignment, blah, blah, blah. All I say always is trigger, 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 that trigger control. And it's something we teach on the range when, for instance, when I would go back to Quantico, and in those situations, when you're going back on what we call a recertification, you work with the troubleshooters, the ones that are flunking out. They've got one last chance, and they send you to them and they say, fix this person. That's what you're supposed to do. And the one thing I always did, and I would start out, I would say, line it all up, get everything good, get your stance, get that great grip. And then I'd say, now I'm going to shoot. And I would turn and face backwards. Even watch the target. Completely backwards and pull, and they would hit dead center of mass.
Right.
And what? I
Uh-huh.
can't believe this. I, how could this be? And I said, yeah, it's the trigger.
Mhm.
And it, to my point that I'm trying to make is if he manufactured this gun himself, who knows what kind of trigger control he had?
Correct. Yep. And, he might not have practiced so much to understand things like trigger control, right? I mean, he didn't look like any what I would call a professional shooter by any stretch of the imagination. And I agree, anybody that's having trouble with having trouble with accuracy, it always comes back to trigger control. But you're right. Who knows what kind of parts he used? Obviously, he didn't use all the right parts. Otherwise, that gun would have worked flawlessly.
Right. And I'm wondering how quiet the gun was. And I'm also wondering um, if anybody heard anything. We haven't seen the witness interviews. We really don't know.
Yeah.
We know they've been done. Everybody keeps asking, what about the person that was standing there or the person in the vehicle? That's all been done, everyone.
Yeah.
But they're not going to release anything other than what they need to. And once we see the probable cause affidavit, that's going to give us a lot more information. But even that's going to just be part of it, part of
Probably
what's.
watered down. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, definitely. What am I missing in terms of uh okay, let's go with this. So once they made that determination and do you write a report in this situation right then or do you wait because you want to get this out quickly? What would you do as an examiner?
Honestly, the agency's policy is probably going to dictate that. So, like, I kind of worked in both scenarios where in one lab, we were allowed to have a little bit of leeway of giving verbal results over the phone without immediately producing a report, right? So in my North Carolina days, we would be able to, if they were on a quick turnaround time, we'd be able to give them verbal results as long as it was verified on the microscope. And then we would continue working the case and put together one final report when we were done. But I've also worked in a lab that had a different policy that kind of changed from having that open communication to more closed off and saying, no, if you're going to give verbal results, you need to issue a report, even if you have to issue a supplemental report later with the rest of the findings. So it's probably going to be the agency policy that's going to dictate that.
Okay, let me ask this. What's the assurity that you have? I'm going to use exactly these facts, right? We have a gun that he manufactured. This isn't, now there could be parts, as you said, that were manufactured, by Glock or by Smith or by Sig, but we know it was a Frankenstein gun. I love that term much better than ghost. Ghost is silly.
Yeah.
A Frankenstein gun. So we have our Frankenstein gun. We have fired. So we've got breech face, ejector, corrector, and firing pin marks. What normally, when you have all of that, is going to be your level of assurity?
I mean, we've never ever been able to testify to scientific certainty, right? Scientific absolution. There's still there's enough of a subjective component to these examinations that the person that comes to the conclusion is going to get it verified by a second person. And so you're only really as confident as the people doing the exam, right? So like if this was my report and I was writing it saying that these are an identification, I'm absolutely positive of my result. Like I would not issue a result that I wasn't absolutely 100% confident in. And I'd like to think that that's pretty standard in the field, that an examiner and an agency is not going to issue results that they're not confident in. We can't put a statistical scientific probability on any of those conclusions. But we kind of talked about this a little bit when we talked about the Delphi case is, can people make mistakes? Sure. Can mistakes get verified? Sure. Right. So, now I would say in my experience, a cartridge case exam like this, and as quick as those results came out, it's probably a pretty clear examination and straightforward, right? So I feel pretty confident in this up to this point, just based on the type of evidence that they were looking at and the type of marks they were using.
Right. Now, when we say scientific, just for our audience,
Yeah.
scientific is DNA. It's been
Most people think of DNA when they think of scientific, statistical, probability type results, right?
and
DNA is going to come out and say it's this person out of greater than the population of the world.
right. And even then, they're not going to say it's 1,000% this person. What they say
Right.
is it's 80 trillion% not anyone else.
Right. Right.
They exclude everybody. They just say, yeah, we're at 80 trillion or whatever it was with Brian Koberger, that we know it's not anybody else, which is basically more than the number of people probably in the universe.
Right.
So, and then there's also fingerprint evidence, which
Yeah.
is truly scientific. But it becomes less scientific depending on, and I don't know, I've had training on it, but I am certainly no expert. Obviously, in the field, taking fingerprints, examining them quickly, learning how to do that. And then you send them off to the lab to the true experts, right?
Right.
But if you have a smudged print, if you have a print with not the proper amount of points, it becomes less and less probability that that's
Right.
that person. And same really with DNA. I mean,
right. Yeah. Realistically, that happens all the time. Just people don't hear about it. Right.
Right. Yes, it does. So I just wanted to point out that is what I believe you mean when you say not scientific per se, because there's a human element of the examination.
Correct. There's a human element, and we argue about objective data and subjective data in forensic science, and with objective being absolute fact. So anything that is a measurement, anything that is dealing with numbers, we call that quantitative data, so numerical type data, that is usually considered objective data. Subjective opinions are, yes, I believe these two patterns are similar enough to say they came from the same origin, or they came from the same gun, or they came from the same finger. So pattern type recognition and pattern analysis, and that is fingerprints, footwear, tire tracks, firearms and tool marks, anything that falls under that category has a layer of subjectivity that's unavoidable. Right? We don't have a machine that we can put these items into and it tells us whether they match or not. That would be objective, right? That would be a machine that's been calibrated and can do that. But machines can't do that because we don't have a machine that is as skilled as the human eye yet, right? So
yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of hope it does. I think all of us are kind of wishing somebody would invent something that does it, because we have to go into court and explain that and defend the fact that this is my opinion, and that, yes, I can be wrong. I have to admit that. Somebody else might come in and do an examination and come to a different conclusion. I don't expect them to, right? I'm confident in my opinion, in my training, in my expertise, but the truth is that it is subjective in nature, and somebody could make a mistake and somebody else could catch it, and it does happen from time to time.
Yeah, not to rehash, but just for our audience or people who just came in, we're dealing with a gun that's a Frankenstein gun that was manufactured, if you will, made by the person who committed this crime. We have breech face, we have firing pin, we have extractor and ejector marks because it actually was fired. So it's not like a manual ejection. So from that standpoint, according to our wonderful examiner, she believes essentially that what was found was likely as accurate as it can be, considering the subjective environment, that it's in. Did
Correct.
I miss anything?
No, that pretty much sums it up. I'm confident in the results that are coming out so far, but I think all of the information will trickle out over time, and those reports will become available and things like that, and we'll get all of the details.
Well, I can't thank you enough. Every time I have an expert on, no matter what the field, I always learn something. I think a lot of times people think, there's a lot of people that are a jack of a lot of trades. I would
Right.
call that an agent. right? There's so much that comes through and we
Right.
handle cases and blah, blah, blah. But then there are the people that is all you do.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
you examine tool marks. And no matter what experience, even if I've seen 100 cases and looked at everything, blah, 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 blah. And it's not like somebody like you who's seen thousands of
Yeah.
these markings and examine it under a microscope. So thank you for your expertise. I'm going to hold you to it and have you back again the next time we have a case that involves tool marks.
Absolutely. Anytime. You just let me know.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You'll have a great night.
All right. Oh my gosh, guys. She's amazing. Um, Talk about somebody so good on the stand. A lot of us have been watching different trials, the Karen Reed trial with some experts, other trials. That's an expert. That's how somebody takes somebody or something that they understand so clearly and they dial it back and make it very easy for someone to understand. I think she brought up great points about objective versus subjective. A lot of people are going to be, of course, saying, we've already seen it, oh, he didn't do it, he didn't do it. And some people are saying, yeah, he did it, thank goodness. They're calling him Saint Luigi and other things. I mean, the bottom line is, I don't think a hero shoots anyone in the back. I'm going to leave it at that in terms of my thoughts on this case. We'll see how all the evidence plays out. He's innocent right now in a court of law until proven guilty. This is a strong one, stronger than a lot of the cases we see. I want to go to comments really quick and see if you have any interesting comments. Oh, and by the way, thank you to my mods. The mods, I don't have very many. In fact, I'm getting ready to add one more who's amazing. But I don't have very many because these mods do such a great job. It's really important to keep, I think, questions and answers and just provoke conversation. And that's what makes a great mod. And that's what I love about seeing the audience too. You guys always have such great questions and answers. Sasha says, missing. Oh, I missed it. It just went right past. He didn't get to finish his hash browns. You know what? If you don't have levity when you work this kind of work and see dead children and see horrible crime scenes and understand how horrible humans can be to other humans, you have to have a sense of humor. Anybody who follows me on Twitter knows I'm constantly peppering in humor because I just think it's a good thing. So I appreciate humor in the string here. Yeah, literally, and I should post it, and I probably will. There's a posting of Saint Luigi going around. And I mean, I've seen so much that's so grotesque in this case from the standpoint of idolizing somebody who many believe committed this crime. So even the people who think he committed it are idolizing him. And as I said, a coward shoots somebody in the back, not a hero. Okay, let's see. Yes, they are great. All right, to everybody, yes, I do want to say HB Girl just wrote up something. Absolutely. I feel horrific, obviously, for Brian Thompson's family. His children have no father. While he was estranged from his wife from all accounts, they had a very amicable situation. He had a girlfriend, I believe, that's been reported. He's separated in the middle of a divorce. He's a son, he's a brother, and he's gone. And whether you agree with his business propositions or not, he didn't deserve to be murdered and shot in the back. Now let's switch to Luigi Mangione. Amazing family from the standpoint of his grandfather raised 10 children, had absolutely nothing, an immigrant who worked hard and built an empire of real estate, country clubs, nursing homes, just an absolute empire. I believe he's worth about, or their family's worth about $100 million. And it's not stopping anytime soon. You know, everything is very successful in that family. He had children. They had children. They had Luigi, is the grandson of the person who really made the empire. He went to, as I said at the beginning, the most prestigious Maryland boys' school, some would argue, in all of Maryland. He went to an Ivy League school. Having gone through this with two of my children, the process to get in these schools is unbelievable. To get into UPenn is unbelievable. And his accomplishments academically have been great. And friends have reported he was a great guy. A lot of people want to blame his back injury on this. Well, I can tell you hundreds of people, dozens that I know, me personally, have had extensive back surgery and never, ever thought about going out and murdering someone. So while people could say it's a trigger, you know, everybody's looking for an excuse. How could this happen? It's hard I think, for us to grapple with somebody who had everything and threw it all away. And that's what we're seeing here. But we're also seeing the anger. We're seeing the narcissism. Look at the monopoly money left in the bag. If that's not narcissistic, I don't know what is. That's where you taunt, and it's not so much about the message of United Healthcare being a monopoly as it is, see how cool I am? I can taunt all of y'all and you still haven't caught me. And same with the markings on the bullet. Remember, depose, in my view, said it from the very beginning, was not about a deposition, a legal deposition. Depose means to remove from office forcefully and suddenly. And that's what he did. He removed him from his CEO office forcefully and suddenly by killing him. This is a guy who has certainly a grandioseness about him. We're going to learn a lot more. I found it very interesting that he has retained his counsel, his attorney. He doesn't have an attorney. Oops, I have to look at the time. Oh, goodness. I have to go. I'm on Vargas. All right. I'm going to sign off. I've been jabbering too long. Thank you again to our wonderful guests. And until next time, may justice be served.